They say the ocean is silent. They're wrong. It listens. That night, even before the first sonar ping echoed back, I could feel it. Something vast and patient moving in the dark. The Pacific Trench didn't just surround us. It watched us. 6,000 meters down, where sunlight dies and metal prays, I learned that silence can roar louder than any explosion. The sonar pulsed again, sharp, deliberate, like a knock on the hull. We froze. It wasn't echo. It was answer. My voice stayed level as I logged it. Unidentified contact, bearing 180. Command replied with static. Silence versus chaos. Perfect balance. That's when the first hairline crack appeared. Not in the glass, in my certainty. Pressure was supposed to be simple down here, 1 atmosphere per 10 meters. But the deeper we went, the heavier their lies pressed. Record, don't question. That's what they told us. So I watched the readings climb while my gut said something beneath us was alive and aware. Through the viewport, darkness folded on itself. For a breath, I thought it was a trick of the floodlights. Then it moved against the current. A slow arc, larger than any vessel we knew. My hands tightened on the controls, the sub humming like a trapped lung. I whispered, "Visual anomaly." But my voice felt too loud, too human for where we were. The shadow slid beneath us, swallowing the sonar feed completely. Every dial shook. Every breath sounded mechanical. And in that instant, I realized it wasn't just the ocean testing our hull. It was something deeper, testing our loyalty. Silence returned, heavy and complete. But the feeling didn't fade. It pressed closer, like truth itself waiting to surface. Slow, patient, and inevitable. When the hull gave way, it didn't explode, it inhaled. The ocean rushed in like it had been waiting centuries for that moment. 1 second we were steady, gauges green, calm silent. The next, every warning light screamed red. The sound wasn't loud, it was sharp, like the world folding in on itself. I remember Turner's voice, clipped mid-sentence, then nothing, just pressure and cold. They say water crushes everything equally, but that's not true. It spares the ones it wants as witnesses. I woke to flickering emergency lights, 2 seats empty, the air thick with antifreeze and silence. My oxygen feed was still live, but my heartbeat felt foreign, too slow, too calm for what I'd just lost. Command's recovery drones found me 6 hours later. The official report would later say, mechanical failure during descent. Clean words for a dirty death. They flew me out in a medical pod, said I was lucky. But luck doesn't explain the sealed compartment I saw jammed behind the pilot console, marked dive log 7 amperes. Restricted access. Someone had wanted it hidden, not recovered. At debrief, I watched them skirt every question. Thermal fluctuation. Stress fatigue. Each phrase was a lid closing on the truth. Yet the readings I'd seen before blackout didn't match equipment failure. They matched interference. Something had disrupted our sonar, drawn power from the main relay. When I signed the survivor's affidavit, I noticed Holt's hand tremble. The same man who once swore nothing lived below the trench shelf. His eyes said more than his words. Don't dig further. But calm is just another kind of cover story. Beneath it, something still moved. In the water, in the files, in me. So before extraction, when no one was looking, I pulled the dive log from the wreck crate and sealed it under my suit. Its casing was dented, salt-scored, but intact. Whatever killed my team wasn't equipment, and whatever command buried down there wasn't done breathing. Fluorescent light burns harsher than the sun when you've been too long underwater. The room feels sterile, white walls, no clocks, recycled air. But the pressure here is worse than in the trench. Down there, at least pressure had purpose. Up here, it's politics. They seat me across from Commander Holt, same man who'd once said I was built for the depths. Now he won't hold my gaze for more than a second. The table between us gleams with mirrored steel. Every reflection fractured. He slides a stack of papers forward. Non-disclosure agreement, mission closure form, psychological clearance checklist. His tone is soft, almost fatherly, but every word weighs heavy with command. Sign it, son. You've been through enough. There's sympathy in his eyes, or maybe guilt disguised as mercy. He talks about national security, about classified sonar data. He doesn't mention Turner. He doesn't mention Ruiz. He doesn't mention the dive log I shouldn't have. Pressure returns, not crushing my ribs this time, but my voice. They want silence, not truth. The same force that buried my team is now shaping my words. Holt's pen taps once, twice, a nervous rhythm that tells me he's scared too, scared of whoever's above him. I scan the documents, every clause reading like a coffin nail. No disclosure of classified mission content, no independent research, no unauthorized possession of naval property. They think grief will make me compliant, but grief has edges, and mine is sharpening. When I finally sign, I do it slow, a signature, not of surrender, but of study. Because the deeper the silence they demand, the louder the truth will echo when it finally surfaces. It started with a typo, one letter off, nothing more. But in a place built on precision, a single wrong letter screams louder than sirens. Project Leviathan, not Leviathan. That was the first thing I noticed when the clearance officer slid my digital report across the terminal for review. The second was the timestamp, logged 2 days after the mission imploded. Curiosity should have drowned with the others, but obedience has never been my oxygen. While Holt and the admin talked logistics, I slipped the drive into my console, fingers steady, pulse not so much. One quick drag, folder to encrypted stick, and it was done. A file transfer disguised as compliance. The progress bar blinked. 87%, 94%, 100%. Small victories don't make a sound, but they echo in the bones. When I opened the directory, I expected sonar graphs or pressure data. Instead, I saw dive footage stamped with impossible coordinates, depths beyond operational limit. The first clip glitched with distortion, like the ocean itself resisted being seen. But for a split second, between static and black water, something moved. Not mechanical, not natural either. The word Leviathan stopped sounding mythical and started feeling classified. I tucked the USB into my cuff pocket, right next to my ID badge. 2 artifacts of loyalty pointed in opposite directions. Holt's voice echoed faintly from the hall, rehearsing lines for the next debrief. He'd tell the board everything went according to plan. I'd tell no one, at least not yet. Ever been told to forget something that won't let you? That's how it starts. Not with defiance, but with a question that refuses to stay buried. The footage plays like a confession. Grainy, timestamp 3 hours 47 minutes and 16 seconds. The sub's camera drifts through black water, sonar pinging slow and steady like a fading heartbeat. At first it's just sediment and shadow. Then, a flicker. A shape too symmetrical to be coral, too fluid to be machine. It glides past the lens, veins glowing a cold electric blue. Massive. Humanoid. Breathing. I freeze the frame, zoom in. The reflection in the glass isn't the creature's, it's ours. A man's outline, lab coat under his dive harness, and beneath the static, a voice. Human. Calm. Clinical. Specimen 4 showing viable response to depth exposure. Initiate containment. Containment. The word lands heavier than pressure ever did. This wasn't discovery. It was design. Whatever we met down there, someone made it, and someone buried it. I scrubbed through the footage again, my pulse syncing with the sonar pings. Each flash reveals more. Chains along the hull, containment crates marked with serial codes, and one I recognize, LVTN04. The same prefix from the mislabeled file. The monster wasn't the ocean's, it was ours. My hands tremble, but not from fear, from fury. I remember Turner joking about myths, Ruiz humming through the static. They weren't killed by nature's unpredictability. They were erased by man's arrogance, by the need to control what should have been left alone. Pressure becomes something else now. Not weight, not depth, containment. The quiet suffocation of truth beneath protocol. I minimize the feed, shut off the monitor, and for a moment, the room feels too still. Surface calm, but underneath, a storm builds, silent and exact, I pocket the drive again, lighter this time, because now I know what I'm carrying. Not evidence, not revenge. Proof that the real Leviathan wasn't in the trench, it was in the mirror. Mara opens the door before I can knock twice. Her eyes are the color of sleepless nights, raw, watchful, unblinking. The house smells of salt and old coffee, like the ocean followed her home and refused to leave. She doesn't invite me in. She just steps aside, quiet as tide retreating. We sit across from each other at a table crowded with unopened mail. Between us lies a thin folder, nothing classified about grief. Yet it feels heavier than any clearance file I've ever signed. She slides a phone toward me. "He tried to tell me something," she says. On screen, fragments of messages appear, time-stamped, the week before the dive. Most are redacted, black bars, slicing through words like scars. Then the transfer notice, clean, dated March 12th, amount $87,500, sender, Rexmar Defense Logistics, routed through a subsidiary I recognize from procurement lists. Same signature series as the Leviathan budget cycle. It's too precise to be coincidence. Mara's voice cracks only once. "They said it was mechanical failure," she whispers. "But his insurance denied payout, classified operations clause. They erased him on paper before they buried him." Her pain is wildfire, but mine has to stay cold. I note the names, the routing code, the timestamp. Each fact becomes a breath I don't waste on rage. She needs someone steady, not someone broken too. When I stand to leave, she reaches for the folder, hesitates, then lets it go. "If you find out why," she says, "don't tell me, just make it stop mattering to them." Outside, the air tastes like iron rain. Grief pulls, but purpose steadies. Her silence becomes my compass, a reminder that the real wreckage isn't underwater. It's what floats back up when you stop pretending not to see. By the time I found the lab, the Atlantic had already begun eating its edges. Storm surge had claimed the loading dock years ago and gulls nested in broken windows. But the files inside were stubborn. The door groaned open on a chain of rust, and light from my headlamp cut the dust into ribbons. Blueprints lay spread like funeral shrouds across a steel table, yellowed at the corners, stamped confidential, Project Leviathan, LVTN Facility 03, with a serial I'd seen on the dive footage crates. LVTN 04 divided by 7, a 22. The smell of formaldehyde and old coffee hung under everything. Containment, it seems, left its scent everywhere. The hook was immediate. Diagrams of a creature's circulatory map, labeled with genetic loci, depth, adaptation markers, and something called pressure-gated hemoprotein, language that read like medicine and malice in the same breath. Margin notes in a technician's hand listed reagents, incubation times, and a staged timeline. Phase I, sequencing, Jan 12, Mar 04. Phase II, in situ exposure, Mar 05, Mar 12. Those dates matched the transfer on Mara's notice and the dive that went wrong. Science meant to protect sailors had been repurposed as a mechanism for control. The contrast hit me like cold water. Intention versus execution, cure versus weapon. I flipped a binder and found photographs. Bone fragments fused to metal, mesh implants, sutures running like seams. A lab notebook contained a note from a lead scientist, penned in a hand that trembled with pride and fear both. Specimen viability exceeds model. Recommend expanded containment. Funding to be consulted. There was a name beneath the scribble, Dr. Elias Hart, and an initialed approval line from someone higher up. For all his measured language and reports, Hart had been human enough to worry about grant renewal and career arc, which explained motive without excusing the choice. Keep results, secure funding, outpace competitors. Ambition had a heartbeat. It sounded disturbingly like impatience. I photographed every page, watching the LED refocus on diagrams that showed deliberate alteration. Marine genome splicing, pressure, adaptive proteins, and containment modules designed to trigger at specific depth thresholds. This wasn't accident or anomaly. It was engineering. Each stamp and signature was a receipt for culpability. The realism anchors were all there. Serial numbers, reagent lot codes, documented waiting periods between exposures, the small procedural frictions that make fiction plausible. Strategy clarified as I leafed through the files. Expose the chain, not hunt the thing. Destroying the specimen would erase proof and feed the same secrecy that birthed it. Instead, I would collect artifacts they couldn't easily bury. Serial-stamped blueprints, signed approvals, the lab notebook, and turn containment on its head. Leak, litigate, and litigate smart. I pocketed a folded schematic, felt the paper's grit, and walked back into the salt air knowing the ocean's weight had shifted. If they wanted to keep the truth under pressure, I would find the vent. I didn't need to see Holt to reach him. One image was enough. A still frame pulled from the dive cam, the creature's luminous outline, frozen mid-turn, with the reflection of a man in a lab coat behind the glass. I attached no text, no threat, just the timestamp and the line subject. 3 hours, 47 minutes, and 16 seconds. Sent to his encrypted Navy address at 2:12 a.m. My pulse stayed steady. Pressure, after all, was something I'd learned to breathe through. He responded 7 minutes later. One line. You don't understand what's down there. No denial, no confusion, just fear disguised as authority. The same tone he'd used in the debrief room, calm but cracking at the edges. The open loop from that night in the trench tightened like a knot around both of us. What did Command hide down there? Now it wasn't a question. It was a confirmation. I reread his message, then checked the header details. The metadata carried a silence clause marker. 70, 2-hour communication lockout. Standard protocol, when a high-ranking officer suspects his correspondence might be monitored. That wasn't policy. That was paranoia. Someone was watching him too. For 72 hours, I waited. The silence was suffocating in its precision. Each day, I checked for a recall notice, a deletion attempt, or any sign of movement from his end. Nothing, just digital stillness where conversation should have been. On the second night, I drove past his quarters. Lights off, blinds drawn. A black SUV with no plates idled across the street, the kind used by internal audit teams. Even the air around that house felt pressurized, like one wrong breath would crack the whole shell. He wasn't my enemy anymore. He was collateral, a man too deep in to climb out without drowning others. Yet sympathy didn't soften the mission. It sharpened it. If he was afraid of surveillance, it meant Leviathan wasn't just a secret buried at sea. It was still alive somewhere, breathing in boardrooms and labs above the surface. The pressure wasn't just under the water now. It was systemic. Contracts, clauses, careers. And for the first time I realized the deeper threat wasn't the creature itself. It was the people who learned how to make one and called it progress. The black market gear arrived in a plain crate, unmarked except for salt stains and a hand-drawn warning, depth eats secrets. I ignored it. Every regulator, every cable, every gauge had been stripped of serial numbers, as if even the equipment knew it was crossing a line. I calibrated the dive computer myself, triple-checking the oxygen mix until the hum of the compressor filled the room like a pulse I could finally trust. Logic told me to stop, but obsession, quiet and persuasive, whispered otherwise. When I'd left the Navy, I promised myself never to dive alone again. Now, isolation felt like the only honest companion left. The ocean didn't lie. It didn't redact or deflect or sign non-disclosures. It simply was, cold, crushing, and clean. The contrast was sharp, surface deceit versus underwater truth. At 2,300 hours, I launched from a fishing dock outside Point Reyes. The sky was heavy with fog, moonlight fractured by mist. Every sound above the water carried a warning, creaks, ropes, my own breath. Yet beneath it all, the sea waited with a strange kind of mercy. I eased into the black, pressure closing in like an embrace I'd been missing. At 50 meters, light vanished completely. Only the faint blue glow of my gauge remained. Pressure settled against my chest, not hostile, not punishing, just present, familiar. Every descent was a negotiation between body and depth, but this one felt like confession. My head filled with fragments, Holt's email, Mara's voice, the diagrams from the lab. Each one pressed against me like invisible ballast, heavier than any gear. Still, I descended. because somewhere in that silence was an answer the surface refused to give. Midway down, I paused to equalize. The static in my comms was soft, rhythmic, almost like breathing. I turned off the link. Better to hear the truth directly. Would you dive again, knowing the truth could kill you twice? For me, the question wasn't rhetorical. It was ritual. The kind of vow made only to oneself, not to survive, but to surface with something that finally makes the drowning make sense. The deeper I went, the calmer I became. Pressure no longer threatened. It steadied me. In its grip, I wasn't breaking. I was becoming exact. The descent feels different this time, deliberate, almost rehearsed, like muscle memory layered over regret. The ocean folds around me in rings of ink, each meter darker than the last. My dive light cuts through the abyss in a narrow cone, illuminating clouds of plankton that drift like ash. The pressure builds, but it no longer feels like resistance. It feels like recognition, the kind of silence that hums back when you finally listen. At 3,800 meters, the trench walls widen into an open chamber. My sonar pings echo off metal instead of stone. The readings spike, confused, geometry where there should be geology. Then my beam catches it, a structure half-grown, half-built. Coral fused to alloy, rebar tangled with bioluminescent tissue. A cathedral made of wreckage. Its shape curves inward like a halo, each arch pulsing with faint blue veins that look disturbingly alive. Inside, the debris tells a story no report ever would. Dog tags suspended in calcified silt, a cracked helmet with a Navy crest, equipment stamped Rexmar Logistics, Marine Systems Division, the same corporate logo I'd traced through budgets and lab memos. It wasn't just a lair, it was a vault, a resting place where science and guilt had fused beyond separation. Then movement, a ripple in the peripheral light. The water thickens, and from the darkness it emerges, slow, massive, weightless. The creature glides into the glow, its outline matching the blueprints I'd memorized. But what stops me isn't its size, it's the way it moves. Every tilt, every slow reach mirrors mine exactly. When I raise my hand, it does the same. Not in aggression, in acknowledgement. I hover, suspended between fear and fascination. My breath fogs the inside of the visor, and through it, I see its eyes, not predatory, but searching. There's something familiar in their rhythm, the pulse along its veins sinking to my heartbeat. It's less like facing a monster, more like staring into an echo. Human versus inhuman dissolves in that silence. The reflection isn't metaphorical anymore, it's literal, refracted in glass and depth. For the first time, I realize Leviathan isn't protecting something down here. It's guarding itself. My comm light flickers. Systems stutter. Pressure trembles through the water like a warning. But I don't ascend. Not yet. The black halo glows brighter, as if waiting for me to understand, and I do. The deeper threat was never just what we created. It's what we became to do it. The signal barely holds this deep, but I angle the transmitter toward the surface anyway. Static bleeds through my comms as I route the live feed directly to Mara's encrypted address. No preface, no warning, just truth in motion. The camera trembles with the current, framing the creature within the black halo. "You need to see this," I whisper, though I'm not sure if she can hear me. The cryptid drifts closer, weightless, curious. Its bioluminescence dims as if adjusting to my light. The frame sharpens, and that's when I see it. Embedded in the creature's chest, half swallowed by layers of coralized tissue, is a piece of metal no one could mistake. A seal insignia, bent but unmistakable. Numbers etched beneath it, 0421HM, Turner's ID, the man who never surfaced. The world narrows to a single inhale. Horror hits first, the physical violation of it, the realization that this thing was once one of us. But then something softer pushes through, unwanted but undeniable, empathy. The way its movements mirror mine wasn't mimicry, it was memory. The creature isn't alien, it's a soldier reshaped by science, rewritten by the ocean and our arrogance. It hovers within arm's reach, bioluminescent veins pulsing faintly, each beat a distorted echo of a human heart. I steady my breathing, lower my hand. The creature doesn't retreat. Instead, it turns slightly, revealing more of the insignia, as if it understands what I'm seeing, what it used to be. For a moment, there's no fear, just the unbearable weight of recognition. Turner, I murmur. The name fogs the inside of my mask. The creature tilts its head, almost a flinch, almost a memory stirring beneath engineered flesh. I can't tell if it knows me, or just senses that I know it. The feed crackles, but the signal stabilizes long enough for one last image, the insignia glinting against biosteel, a human relic trapped in something meant to erase humanity. Then the transmitter overloads. The screen goes white, and the connection severs. Above, Mara will see what I saw, not a monster, but proof that the real horror wasn't what lived beneath the sea. It was what we buried there, hoping it would never look back. The moment the feed burned white, the silence came roaring back. No comms, no telemetry, no contact. Just the rhythmic hiss of my own regulator and the steady crush of water pressing against my ribs. I ascended slow, controlled, each meter a negotiation between disbelief and instinct. By the time I breached the surface, dawn had smeared the horizon in gray. The sea looked calm, too calm, like it knew something I didn't. My support vessel wasn't where it should have been. Instead, two black Zodiac crafts bobbed near the coordinates, unmarked but unmistakably military. The ship I'd chartered was being stripped, drones scanning its hull, uniformed figures hauling crates into containment pods. From a distance, it looked surgical, almost routine, but I recognized the rhythm of the operation. Protocol 47, B, asset containment. Standard response, when classified material is compromised. They hadn't come to rescue me, they'd come to erase the evidence. When I finally reached the dock, my ID card refused the scanner. Access revoked. Status suspended. The message repeated in sterile blue text, pulsing like a heartbeat. My calls to command redirected to administrative review. My military inbox was locked behind a new security layer. Everything that had once confirmed my existence now denied it. I didn't fight. Chaos thrives on reaction, and I'd learned long ago that stillness cuts deeper. I watched them impound the submersible, listened as an officer cited containment breach, without looking me in the eye. Calm versus chaos, their frenzy against my quiet. By nightfall, the docks were empty again, swept clean of any trace I'd ever been part of the mission. But they missed something. The drive inside my dive computer, sealed beneath a panel, dry and intact. Blueprints, video, metadata, proof. They could revoke credentials, but not memory, not the weight of what I'd seen. As I walked away from the harbor, the silence finally felt earned, not imposed, but chosen. The Navy had taken my title. The ocean had taken everything else. What remained was mine to use. The first war I ever fought was underwater. The second began behind a laptop in a rented apartment with paper-thin walls and an untraceable VPN. The irony wasn't lost on me. I'd traded oxygen tanks for encryption keys, depth gauges for deadlines. Pressure had followed me to the surface, but this time, I controlled the valve. I started with the encrypted emails, fragments copied from the Leviathan archives, each header a breadcrumb. Subject lines like phase continuity, containment review, adaptive genome licensing. I attached timestamp sonar data, the same frequency distortions that matched human biometric rhythm patterns, the kind of proof you couldn't unsee once you recognized the heartbeat inside the noise. Then came the calls, recorded through burner lines, each conversation cataloged like a dive log. Journalists first, one from the Maritime Ledger who'd covered naval procurement scandals, and another from Public Dominion, an outlet too small to be noticed but too stubborn to be silenced. I gave them just enough to verify, never enough to trace. This isn't revenge, I said once. It's rectification. My next move was legal, not loud. I filed a whistleblower claim through an attorney who specialized in defense misconduct, the kind who quoted precedent like scripture. We drafted motions referencing U.S. Code 50, Section 3093, unauthorized biological experimentation. The realism of it grounded everything: signatures, waiting periods, affidavits notarized in triplicate. The system that once buried me now became my breathing apparatus. The senator's aide answered on the third attempt. She sounded young, careful. "You're accusing active contractors of human bioengineering under naval authority," she said. "Do you have physical proof?" "I have blueprints, serials, and sonar patterns that match human vitals at impossible depths," I replied. "And I have a name, Project Leviathan." Silence, then the sound of a pen scratching. "You'll need a scientist to corroborate the genetic data." Enter Dr. Hannah Voss, a marine biologist who'd once co-authored a paper on deep-sea genome resilience before her funding mysteriously vanished. When I sent her a data packet labeled LVTN-4 sequence, her reply came 6 hours later. "This isn't mutation, it's manufacturing." With that, the dam cracked. One outlet leaked sonar graphs showing synchronized pulses with diver biometrics. Another published the budget trail from Rexmar Defense to a Shell nonprofit. Each piece hit like a controlled detonation. Clean, factual, undeniable. The motif of pressure shifted again, from something crushing to something cleansing. Silence breaking not through explosion, but through exposure. The ocean had pressed against me until I became precise. Now precision was my release. I watched the first article go live from a diner at midnight. The screen glowed against the window, headlines reflecting in cold coffee. Outside, waves crashed against the pier, steady and indifferent. The war wasn't won yet, but for the first time, the tide was pulling in my direction. I'd learned something from the ocean. Patience isn't stillness, it's pressure waiting for purpose. That lesson shaped the trap. I sent Commander Holt a simple, sterile message through an untraceable relay. "We need to talk. Coordinates attached. You'll want to see this in person. No threats, no explanations. Just enough bait to make a cautious man walk into deep water." The coordinates pointed to a stretch of decommissioned coastline, an old sonar calibration station half submerged by tides. It was perfect. Neutral ground with no official jurisdiction, a blind spot between Coast Guard coverage zones. Legally, it was nowhere. Strategically, it was mine. I spent 3 nights prepping the site. 2 drones disguised as gull deterrents watched the perimeter. A thermal camera fed into a laptop hidden under driftwood, patched to a satellite uplink I'd synced to pass overhead at 0317 hours. A narrow window when the feed couldn't be jammed without detection. Every variable was accounted for. Every delay predicted. But patience wasn't about control. It was about expectation. Holt would come not because he wanted answers, but because he couldn't risk me giving them to anyone else. Men like him only move when their silence feels heavier than the truth. I planted the uplink transmitter beneath the platform's rusted frame, tethered it to a failsafe script that would go live if my vitals stopped transmitting. A dead man's upload, insurance against the inevitable. As I waited, the tide whispered over the pylons, dark water folding and unfolding like slow breath. I watched the horizon, counting seconds in the soft mechanical rhythm of my pulse monitor, the same sound that once guided me through the trench. Preparation versus impulsivity. That was the real battle. The urge to end it here and now, to drag him under with the truth, pulsed just beneath the calm. But no, this time, pressure would work for me, not against me. When Holt's convoy appeared as twin dots on the thermal feed, I exhaled once, steady and deliberate. Everything was in motion. The trap wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about revelation, and revelation required patience. Low tide exposes everything. Bones, wreckage, truths that were meant to stay buried. By the time Holt's boots hit the sand, the water had receded far enough to reveal the jagged remains of the old sonar platform, half drowned in seaweed and salt. The horizon burned faint orange, the kind of dawn that doesn't promise warmth, only visibility. He approached like a man walking into his own obituary, posture stiff, expression unreadable, uniform stripped of insignia but not authority. 2 shadows flanked him, his cleanup team, standard issue rifles, standard issue nerves. I stayed still, hands visible, the ocean whispering between us. "Didn't think you'd actually show," I said, voice even. "You left me no choice," Holt replied. His tone carried that familiar weight, the mix of control and regret. You've put people in danger. You think you're exposing corruption, but you're unraveling protection. I almost laughed. Protection? You built a goddamn monster and then lied when it started breathing. He hesitated, eyes narrowing. It wasn't meant to kill. It was meant to defend. We were losing control of the seas. Sonar jamming, territorial incursions, deep mining sabotage. Leviathan was a deterrent. His jaw clenched until it became aware. There it was, the first crack, guilt versus duty. His voice trembled not from fear, but from the burden of belief. He wanted to convince me, maybe himself, that it had been necessary. I reached into my pack slowly, pulling out the transmitter tablet. On screen, a live feed from the dive cam, synced to the satellite uplink I'd wired hours earlier. The timestamp rolled, Sandia and Arshasifan. Then, from the deep black frame, movement. The creature rose. Not fast, not cinematic, slow, deliberate, like something remembering gravity. The camera caught its outline. Humanoid, luminous veins, pulsing faint blue beneath translucent flesh. The water shimmered as if alive with static. Its face, distorted yet unmistakably human, turned toward the light. Holt's breath hitched. He recognized it before I said the words. "That's Lieutenant Reyes," I murmured. "Your diver. The one you said we lost to pressure failure." The silence between us tightened. The cleanup men shifted uneasily. I tapped another screen. The feed split, half showing the creature's ascent, half showing a public live stream link already active. Viewers, 2,000 and climbing. The leaked broadcast. The truth rising with the tide. "This isn't about me anymore," I said. "This is every order you signed, every lie you told to keep the surface calm while the depths screamed." Holt stared at the feed. No words, no excuses left. His silence wasn't resistance, it was confession. The wind picked up, carrying salt and static through the air. The cleanup team lowered their weapons, uncertain now who they were protecting. Holt finally spoke, voice low and fractured. "You've doomed us all," he said. I met his eyes, calm, steady, the same way I'd faced the dark below. "No," I replied. "I've just stopped holding my breath." Behind him, the waves began to rise again, reclaiming the platform, washing away the footprints, the lies, and the last illusion of control. The ocean convulsed once, then split open like a wound remembering pain. From its depths, the creature rose, not with fury, but exhaustion. Steam hissed around its shoulders where the cold met heat, a shimmer of veins like fractured lightning beneath translucent skin. It wasn't roaring, it was breathing. For a long, impossible moment, no one moved. The cleanup men froze, rifles slack in their grip. Holt stared, lips parted, as if language had failed him entirely. The creature's head tilted toward the horizon, toward the rising sun bleeding gold through the fog. Not at us, not at vengeance, just toward light. I stepped closer, every instinct trained for fight twitching against the weight of understanding. Its eyes, if they could be called that, reflected the ocean itself. Depth over darkness, silence over wrath. The weapon at my hip felt like an insult. Slowly, deliberately, I holstered it. "You remember, don't you?" I whispered, though I wasn't sure who I was asking, the man it once was or the god we made from him. The creature's chest rose with another trembling breath. A sound escaped, low, wet, almost human. Not rage, grief. Holt broke first. This isn't what we built," he muttered, stumbling backward. The tide caught his boots, then his knees. We were supposed to control it. The next wave hit harder, pulling at him like the sea had been waiting. He turned toward it, panicked, then defiant, as if begging the depths for forgiveness or command. The water swallowed him mid-sentence. No scream, just the hollow clap of surf closing over authority. The cryptid didn't follow. It only watched the spot where he vanished, the same way it had watched us once from below. Its massive form trembled, then steadied, not in menace, but release. Nature reclaiming what was taken. Foam circled around its shoulders, glowing faintly in rhythm with its pulse. The cleanup men dropped their weapons and ran. I didn't stop them. The ocean didn't either. When the creature finally turned back toward the horizon, I understood the choice in its silence. It could destroy, but it didn't. It rose, endured, and let the world see itself reflected in something it tried to bury. As it slipped beneath the waves once more, the surface calmed, as if the sea had exhaled. No blood, no explosion, just consequence. And for the first time since the trench, I felt the weight lift. Not from victory, but from letting the truth breathe. By the end of the month, headlines replaced the horizon. Defense Biolab scandal uncovered. Deep-sea weaponization program under federal inquiry. The networks called it the biggest classified breach in 2 decades. They spoke of whistleblowers, encrypted leaks, congressional hearings. None mentioned my name, and that was exactly how I wanted it. The investigation rolled out in procedural waves. Subpoenas issued within 14 days. Debrief panels convened by week 6. Redacted transcripts leaked by week 10. The defense subcommittee called it Project Leviathan, an oversight failure. They called it that because Abomination doesn't fit inside government language. I watched it unfold from a coastal motel room, neutral ground between exposure and anonymity. The air smelled like rust and old salt. Every morning, I'd scan the headlines on a cheap tablet, watch the world pretend to understand what it had nearly unleashed. Holt's death was recorded as drowning during retrieval. Clean, efficient. Bureaucracy's way of mourning. The footage I'd sent had already been dissected by analysts, labeled deepfake by some, divine proof by others. But the scientists knew better. The sonar signatures, the bioluminescent frequencies, those couldn't be fabricated. The cryptid had been real. And now, it was gone. Some claimed it had been captured again. Others said it migrated deeper, beyond reach. I preferred the latter. The ocean, after all, forgets no one. It just keeps their secrets better than we do. At night, I'd stand by the shoreline, the same one where Holt vanished, and listen to the waves breathing against the rocks. Calm, steady, relentless. The pressure was gone, but not erased, just transformed. Like everything that survives the depths, the world would move on, file it under classified history. But I knew better. Some silences aren't broken. They're honored. And beneath the surface, the ocean still remembers every name we tried to bury. I laid everything out one last time. The dive log, the still frames, the printouts from Mara's folder. Each artifact felt heavier than its weight allowed, soaked in memory and salt. The log's final page was smudged where ink met seawater, but Holt's message was still legible. It was never meant to live. His words read like both confession and warning. I sealed the documents in a weatherproof case, labeling it after action, personal. Closure should have felt cleaner, but truth has a way of echoing, soft, persistent, unfinished. I'd promised myself no crusades, no press conferences, no revenge dressed as justice. Yet even as I packed, I knew the story hadn't sunk. It was only submerged, waiting for light again. Outside, the air carried that same metallic taste the ocean leaves behind after a storm. Calm, but not peaceful. I uploaded an encrypted copy of the files to an anonymous archive, a failsafe against the silence returning. The rest I left in a safety deposit box under a false name. As I locked the lid, I realized the cryptid was never the monster we were. It just surfaced when the truth needed a body. The case clicked shut, final yet unfinished. Some things belong to the deep, but light always finds a way down. Months later, my life runs on quieter tides. I teach civilian divers now, beginners who chase coral gardens and selfies, not classified ghosts. The training pool smells of chlorine instead of brine, but every time a regulator hisses, I hear the ocean breathing back. Calm waters lie, I tell them. What looks still on the surface is only pretending. During drills, I catch myself scanning the sonar out of habit. The soft ping, pause, ping, still feels like a heartbeat. One of my students jokes that I listen too hard. I just smile and say, depth listens too. They laugh, unaware of how true that is. Routine has its own pressure. Paperwork replaces debriefs. Lesson logs replace mission reports. Yet the rhythm remains: inhale, descend, exhale, rise. Reflection versus repetition. Sometimes, as I guide a diver back to the ladder, I see flashes of light beneath the surface, refracted sunbeams, or maybe memory refusing to die. When the day ends, I sit by the dock, watching the Pacific flatten into gold. My hands still carry faint scars from gear straps, reminders that survival leaves marks you don't rinse off. The world believes the ocean quieted after the Leviathan leak. Maybe it did, or maybe it just learned to keep its secrets deeper. Either way, I've stopped needing answers. I teach them how to breathe, how to surface slowly, how to respect what they can't see. Because no matter how calm the water looks, I know better now. The surface is never still. The ocean hums beneath the recording, low, steady, infinite. I let the sound fill the gaps where words can't go. There's no need for drama now, just clarity, like pressure finding its balance after a long dive. They called it an abomination. I call it a witness. The line lands clean, not defiant, just true. I've spent months learning to live in the open again, to let silence work for me instead of against me. It's strange how freedom doesn't roar. It exhales. I speak into the mic with the same calm I once reserved for the deep. My voice doesn't shake. I'm done hiding behind clearance codes and command chains. Exposure over erasure, that's the choice I made, and it's the one that keeps me breathing. I upload the final audio file, labeling it simply pressure equalized. No names, no signatures, just truth suspended in sound. Outside, waves fold over themselves in slow applause. The horizon is clean, stripped of myth. Somewhere out there, the creature still moves. Not a threat, not a secret, just proof that survival takes many shapes. For the first time in years, I don't flinch at quiet. Silence isn't what holds me down anymore. It's what keeps me steady.